Hello and welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Executive Presence for Female Leaders, How the Image You Project Impacts Performance. Today we will hear from Booth alumna MaryBeth Ziegler, who is an experienced leadership and career coach with more than 25 years of experience working with executives and their teams. She coaches senior leaders, managers, and high potentials to acquire the leadership tools they need to successfully advance their careers. MaryBeth is also an adjunct instructor at NYU, where she teaches leadership coaching. Previously, she had a career in management consulting, international corporate finance, and human resources. In her last corporate role, MaryBeth led high potential talent development and recruitment initiatives for Unilever US. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to MaryBeth.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam, and welcome everyone. I hope you're all having a great day wherever you are. So we're here today to talk about executive presence, specifically for female leaders. And let's just jump into it. So thank you for that introduction. I won't hover on this slide. I'm a specialist in leadership development and typically run coaching and consulting engagements for large corporations. So executive presence, right? It's something we've all heard about. Let's just watch this quick video.
Executive presence.
Executive presence. Presence.
I'd hope it has something to do with integrity, but in this day and age, obviously, it doesn't always.
Making sure your executives have a presence within the organization, people know who they are.
Executive presence to me is the ability to command a room. When you walk in, you gather the attention of all the people there, and creating a culture within the company you work for that inspires people to follow and to work towards whatever the goal of the organization is.
Okay, so a little video, some confusion from those people they interviewed on the streets of London about what executive presence is. So I'm curious to hear from all of you. So we have a little poll that we're going to pop up. If we could pull up that first poll, Adam, that asks the question, what does executive presence mean to you? So if you could select which of those you feel executive presence is most about, and we'll take a look and see what the majority of you think.
Great, so I just launched the poll and we've got folks weighing in, so we'll give the audience just a few seconds to respond and then I'll share those results.
Great, thank you, Adam.
All right, so it looks like we had the largest percentage, 42% of our respondents that said strong communication skills are what executive presence means to them. 36% said confidence in yourself, 16% expertise and knowledge, and 6% dress and appearance.
Okay, great. Awesome. So we didn't have a category there that said all of the above. But let's go ahead and jump forward and take a look at what the research tells us about what executive presence actually is. So executive presence, and this comes from the book called Executive Presence by an economist by the name of Sylvia Ann Hewlett, who specializes in talent initiatives and consulting. And her research showed that executive presence actually is not a measure of performance at all. It is a measure of image. And it's the signal to others that you have what it takes to get your job done. So separate from your technical and expertise and your qualifications, but it's how do you signal to others that you can actually do the job? And so she went out and researched and talked to and surveyed 4,000 plus college educated professionals across the US. They had in-person interviews with senior leaders and multiple focus groups. And let's take a look at her, Sylvia Ann Hewlett, talking about what executive presence and what her research actually showed.
Executive presence, or EP, is simply what you signal to the world, what you telegraph to the world in terms of, first, your gravitas, Do you really know your stuff cold? Do you give the impression that you're 3 questions deep, in your field of expertise? Perhaps do you have intellectual horsepower? How do you signal that? That's the gravitas piece. Secondly, do you have really serious communication skills? Can you get your ideas across? Can you be heard? Because no matter how profound your gravitas, if you can't somehow, get it across, it becomes dead in the water. And then finally, presentation of self. The way you dress, your body movement, the way you stand and walk. All of this incredibly critical in allowing your gravitas again to get across. So the great thing about, this piece of work, we went out to 4,000 professionals around the US in all kinds of different sectors and 300 leaders. It was a representative sample, so we do know what our colleagues and what our bosses are really looking for on this front. And it's fascinating because it turns out there really is almost a checklist out there that we can work with, and much of this is very learnable.
Okay, great. So that last statement that you said, much of this is very learnable. So that's the upside of what we're going to talk about today. And we'll talk about maybe what your opportunities are for executive presence toward the end, and maybe put an action plan in place for yourself to improve those, if that's one of the things that you were hoping to get out of this webinar today. So let's take a look specifically at what she just mentioned in terms of executive presence. So 67% of executive presence is how you act, what she defined as gravitas. And more specifically, we'll take a look at what all of the elements that combine into this gravitas piece, that you know your stuff cold, and that you can go 6 questions deep. So you absolutely have to have the knowledge, but it's conveying that you have the knowledge. The second part of executive presence, about 28%, is the communication skills, right? So how you speak. How effectively do you convey your message? Can you powerfully connect with and engage your audience? Can you hold their attention? So how you speak. And then the last part of executive presence, what a lot of people think about when they think about executive presence, how you look. So research shows it's actually a very small part in terms of the component of it as executive presence. But it's very critical, because if you get this part of it wrong, you really diminish the rest of it. So small but critical part, which is your appearance, and it's really the filter through which gravitas and communication skills are evaluated. Each of these things has its own meaning, and the context and culture of where you work will absolutely affect the specifics of this. So executive presence in a financial services firm is going to look different than it does in a tech firm or a consumer products firm or a nonprofit or museum. Different organizations have different styles of executive presence. And one of the things that I work on when I'm coaching clients on executive presence is to find appropriate role models. If we're uncertain about how to develop our executive presence, find somebody in the organization, in your organization, that you admire, that you think embodies really good executive presence, and look at what they're doing and maybe what your opportunity is to do the same, because it's definitely contextual and situational in terms of how you can best develop your executive presence. So let's dive a little deeper into each one of these elements, starting first with gravitas, which is the most important. Gravitas, as it came out in the research, was a number of things. I have the top ones listed here. It's that ability to show confidence, especially when under fire, right? Grace under fire, when you're facing with difficulty. It's that ability to be decisive, especially when you most need to. It's showing integrity, that your actions and words align. There's a degree of emotional intelligence to this, as well as the reputation and standing that you have with others in the firm. And finally, vision and charisma. So that's a lot. There's a lot going on with this definition of gravitas. And any one of these is something that I might work with the client on for months. But I guess the question that I have for you as you start to think about yourself, which of those areas in gravitas represents your biggest opportunity? Is it perhaps showing up with more confidence? And when? Is that with people above you, with peers? Maybe it's being more decisive in the moment. You tend to favor more collaboration. Maybe it's just showing more vision and strategy. For a lot of people, these things can be a work in progress over a career. So I invite you at this point just to start to think about, in the gravitas piece, what might your opportunity be? And we'll talk about at the end how you might get some feedback on which areas you might most want to work on if you're not sure. Let's take a look at the communication piece next. So communication, very clearly defined, your speaking skills, your ability to not only convey the message, but to command a room, your assertiveness in speaking. And we're going to take a look at that because assertiveness can be a double-edged sword, particularly with females. Your ability to read the room, right? How well are you seeing what's not being said? How well are you able to decide who you most need to influence to convey your message effectively? There's some element of a sense of humor to this, right? We all know that we gravitate more towards people that can have a sense of humor, that aren't too serious all the time. And then finally, body language, which is critical. And again, something that can get in your way. And finally, let's take a look at appearance. So appearance, very simply, is your polish, your grooming, and the ability to dress one level up. And appearance at its best, it's simple, it's clean, it's confident, and it doesn't get in the way of the other two categories, the gravitas and the communication, so that you can be seen, your expertise can be seen, and you can communicate effectively without anything about your appearance getting in the way. And again, using a benchmark in the organization is typically the best thing to do if you're not certain what that is, and one level up. This gets really interesting in some industries like tech, where everybody's wearing jeans and hoodies all the time. But think about, for you, what does it need? What do you need to convey with your appearance? And what's the most appropriate way for you to stay relevant to the organization, but to be that one level up? So let's take a look at some people in the common world and talk about how they might exemplify executive presence, some role models, for example. Okay, so this first one, some of you may be familiar with Cornel West. He is a professor of philosophy at Union Theological Seminary in New York. He's also a civil rights activist. He's very well known for his oratorical skills, right? He's got this commanding presence. You can tell, even if you've never seen Cornel West speak, you can see by his look. He's got a very distinctive look. He tends to wear actually quite attention-grabbing things. Here he's actually quite demure looking in the black suit. He commands his audience. He talks about serious things, right? Civil rights, and he doesn't hesitate to stand out. In fact, he uses it a way as drawing attention to himself and then holding that attention and delivering a very strong message. A second example, Angela Merkel. So Germany's chancellor, she exudes competence, right? You can see her body language in this. She's surrounded by some very powerful men, and she has to hold her own. She knows how to convey that image, right? She's really showing her presence there. She's showing her assertiveness, her authority. Her clothes, they don't get in the way, right? Her appearance. She is who she is. It doesn't get in the way, and that lets her step forward in the most meaningful way she can with her authority. An example from tech, Steve Jobs, known for his trademark black turtleneck. So he dressed suitable to the tech industry. He usually had jeans on and the black turtleneck. It was a casual symbol. It was simple. It was also powerful in his own way. The repetitive nature of what he wore conveyed a brand image, right? And in an interesting way, his clothes conveyed the same image as his products. Simple, right? Easy to recognize, user-friendly, but also there's a degree of power and sophistication to that. And then another example from tech. So many examples I could have chosen, but I chose Marissa Meyer here. I chose her actually because she's in tech. She's had a difficult history in some ways with some of her jobs, right? Former CEO of Yahoo. She's made some difficult decisions while at Yahoo. She was unpopular for a while. She came back with some policies that were more welcome and received. The shares rebounded. But what I really like about her is that she's unabashedly feminine in her style, and that doesn't get in the way. She favors dresses. She wears a lot of feminine colors like pink. Her hair is on the longer side. And that doesn't impact or detract from her ability to be who she is. And I think she's a great example of the grooming and the appearance and the dressing one level up in a very simple and simplistic way. So we can see there are so many different ways to embody executive presence. And this becomes then a personal choice. What for you makes the most sense given the role you're in, or maybe the role you're moving into, or the organization that you're in, or maybe the type of role or organization you hope to be in? And as female leaders, many of you, I'm sure, on the webinar today are females, maybe not all, but let's just pause for a moment, because female leaders in particular have a hard time in how they project their executive presence. Research going back to the early days, like the 1970s, when leadership was first starting to be studied as a thing, right, as a field of study, research showed that both men and women perceive leadership attributes to be more likely held by men, and the positive leadership attributes to be those leadership attributes that are more masculine. And studies over the last 40 years have confirmed this, that most of us associate masculine attributes with leadership suitability and female attributes with taking care of others. So if you're in a social service organization, that might work really well. But if you're not, right, if you're in a corporation or a bank or a tech industry, whatever it is, if the organization and the majority of the people associate leadership suitability with masculine traits, what does that mean for us? And we know as women, if you spent time working, that there is that fine line, right? It can be hard to find that right amount of presence so that we're not coming across as too aggressive, but are we being assertive enough? We need to command the room, but that can come across as too opinionated, right? We're too nice, we're too blunt. It can be really hard to find that sweet spot where we're conveying effectively the attributes that we need to be a leader in our organization. And I know from the coaching work that I've done, I've seen 360s. I do many, many 360 feedback assessments in the coaching that I do. And sometimes within the same 360, I'm seeing both sides of this feedback coming in too blunt, too nice, too aggressive, not aggressive enough. The same people in the organization are giving polar opposites of who that person is. And that's one of the problems with feedback, right? It often says more about the person giving the feedback than it says about us. But what does that mean then about our ability to create the right executive presence? So getting peer feedback and having a group of other women and mentors that can support you in this is critical. We're going to take a look at that at the end. But I guess for you, think about over the course of your career, which side of this line do you tend to fall the most on? And what's your opportunity to step it up a little, maybe not too nice, but without shifting into that too blunt or too direct? But we know that the research shows that this can be quite difficult. So to jump back into some more recent research, there was an experiment done at NYU Stern, NYU's business school. They did this twice. They did this in 2003, and they did this more recently in 2013. So students were asked to assess the leadership capabilities of a real-life successful entrepreneur. They read a case. Half of the students had the case where the entrepreneur was named Heidi, a woman, and half had the case where the entrepreneur was named Howard, a man. The majority of the students who had Heidi as a leader perceived her as selfish, out for herself, and political, and not as likable as Howard. The students that had Howard saw him as a much more effective entrepreneur, in other words, than the students that thought the entrepreneur was female. Same case, same issues and actions taking place by this person, but the distinction was, did they think she was female or male? They did this study again in 2013. Same thing, they renamed the person in the case Catherine or Martin. In this case, we've evolved a little bit because the students actually liked Kathleen a little bit more, but they didn't trust her. They liked her more, but they didn't trust her. Comments came in that said, men seem more genuine, and the woman seems to be trying too hard, making the woman less trustworthy. And so what we come to with female leadership specifically is sometimes we find there's a trade-off between likability on the right-hand side of that line and competence, which maybe tends towards the left-hand side. And it creates this double bind for us because we should be able to do both at the same time. And finally, just one more note of recent research. Deborah Grunfeld, who's a professor at Stanford, has written a lot about body language and power. And I relate this into influence as well and executive presence. She says that to have really effective, powerful body language, female leaders specifically need to be able to do two things. They need to be authoritative and they need to be approachable. But the key is not to do those two things at the same time. That's almost impossible. The key is to know, when do you need to show up as authoritative? Where do you need to really show up as that person where you're taking control, that you're saying, I'm the person with the expertise here and here's what I have to say. And then when are those times where you are being more approachable, where you are tending on the style of a more collaborative style of communication? So keep that in mind as you think about your executive presence as well. When are the instances for you to show up with authority, and when are the instances for you to show up with approachability? And balancing those, depending on the situation, can help you develop the right kind of executive presence. Okay, so let's move on. Another question that comes up a lot, not only for females when I do coaching with executives, this comes up for a lot of different people, including usually people of diverse backgrounds who might be working with American culture for the first time, or maybe not even for the first time, but they still struggle with that idea of how can I be authentic to who I am, but to what degree do I need to conform to the culture of the organization? And the question really is, do you need to suppress this difference to be perceived as leadership material? I think we can think back to Cornel West, who definitely doesn't suppress that innate uniqueness that he has, and he uses that to his benefit. But this can be quite difficult when we're working in organizations where there is a real sense of conformity, and where many of the senior leaders, their look tends to mirror each other. If we're different in some way, what does that mean? It can be quite difficult to not be authentic, right, to ourselves. And in fact, it's critical to be authentic because people can see through when we're trying to project a fake image. However, we do know that success in any organization requires a little bit of accommodation to that culture, right? If you're in financial services, you probably can't come to work all in black with lots of piercings and lots of ink showing, because that's probably not the culture at any point in the organization. But do you have the ability to reflect a little bit more of the uniqueness of who you are? Absolutely. But for you, you need to decide if assimilating is playing the game or selling out. And I'd say take it to the point of assimilating to make an impact, to protect yourself, to develop your career, but don't assimilate so much that you don't feel like it's you going to work, because obviously you won't be enjoying waking up every day and going into that job. So hopefully we can talk more about those questions at the end as we have the questions and answers. I know that's open at any time, so if you have questions about these topics or comments or things you'd like to discuss, feel free to drop those into the question box at any time. So moving on, let's shift into some tips. How do we actually improve these skills? So first with gravitas, how might we deepen gravitas? So again, there were so many attributes to that gravitas piece. There's 100 different ways that any one individual might look at that or might choose to focus. But I brought together the top 5, especially in what I see in working with female leaders. The first, be confident in yourself. Start by working from a place of your strengths, and then surround yourself with people who complement our weakness. And I think this can be sometimes the hardest thing for female leaders. We think that we need to be everything. We don't want to show any weakness, and we try to overcompensate. First, again, know your strengths, know how you work best. If you've never taken any kind of assessment, look into that. There's a great simple one. It's $19, $20. It's called the Strengths Finder. It tells you your top 5 strengths. It can be a great starting point to say, how do I work when I'm at my best, when I'm most naturally doing what I do best? Start from working from your strengths, and then look to how you can supplement your weaknesses with the people around you. Another key thing about the gravitas piece is that leaders are seen as more confident when they acknowledge and accept their weaker points. Obviously, they're not saying, I'm weak at this and therefore it's not going to happen, but they know how to fill that in with their peers and with their reports and with other people on the team. So don't be afraid to also acknowledge your weaknesses and either put a plan in place to address or make sure you surround yourself with people that can. Secondly, integrity, so important. Nothing derails a career quicker, especially at the senior leader levels, when people don't think you have integrity. So having integrity, what you say and what you do match, and you actually do the things that you say you're going to. Be credible. That ability to go 6 questions deep, to know your stuff cold. You have to do your research, right? You have to be able to share your point of view. And the deeper you can go, the more you know your stuff cold, actually the easier it is to step back. And when you share your point of view, to do it in a way that isn't too much sharing, too much detail, too much information. It lets you get really good at bringing your credibility up a notch so that when you're sharing, you're saying only exactly what needs to be said. Be decisive, right? You need to be seen in organizations as somebody that's willing to step in and lead change rather than the person that's hanging back waiting to be changed. So what is your opportunity with that? What might you step into to lead new projects, new teams? How might people see you as somebody who's stepping up into lead and lead change specifically? And that's a great way just to show decisiveness and commitment. Finally, improving your reputation and standing. So people make a snap judgment of you from the second they meet you, right? And then we spend lots of time developing that standing and that reputation over the course of years. But one thing can derail that in an instant, and then we've lost people. We've lost their trust. Maybe they don't think we have any integrity. So reputation and standing is something that we also always have to be aware of. But critical to that, in today's organizations in particular, more and more it's important to be a team player, and more it's important to lose the ego. So egocentric hero-style leadership is thankfully becoming a thing of the past, and leaders themselves are being tasked with being more team players, being more collaborative, being better coaches of their teams, and being more compassionate and selfless. So 5 tips on deepening gravitas. And let's move on to communication skills. So again, I narrowed down to the top 5. The first, one thing that I see with a lot of female clients, it's ditching those verbal crutches and any kind of props. It's the the likes, you know, things that undermine the message of what we're trying to say. If these are things that you do, or you're not sure if you do them, film yourself speaking. I know it can be uncomfortable, or have somebody film yourself even more meaningfully in a meeting. Notice how you speak. Are you filling in? Are you looking at the slides instead of at the audience? So just be aware of those verbal cues and props in the room that tend to get away from your ability to command the audience. This is an interesting one, less about commanding a room and more about when you go into a room or after hours when you're with clients or with people in the organization. Can you do small talk with them, right? Cocktail chatter. Are you up enough on some of the recent events, current events, simple things people like to talk about, the Super Bowl or sports, whatever's going on in the world? Do you have a few things that you can talk about? That's critical. I've often coached female executives on this. They're not sure what do they talk to people about when they're more senior than they am and they tend to be male, right? Again, sports is always a good go-to, but know your audience, know what they like. And then even more meaningfully beyond the small talk, know your audience, right? Know what they're interested in. If you know they're volunteering on the weekends with a charity, talk to them about that. If you know about their family, their children, if you've ever had any conversation, bring that up. The people that are most effective at the small talk keep a mental record or maybe even a paper record of what they've talked to that person about in the past so that they can refer to that. This isn't just strategic, it's smart, right? People like people when they talk to us about ourselves, when we can talk about ourselves and when we can talk about things that we enjoy. So this is a great way to get to know the people around you in a more informal way. They're going to like you more. Your reputation and standing is going to go up. Their trust in you, interestingly, is also going to go up. Third, make sure you have control of your voice, right? We want to make sure that when we get up to speak, we're speaking in a meaningful way, not too fast, not too slow. Our voice isn't scratchy. Some people take a deep breath right before they go onto like a big stage, if you've ever given a big presentation, right? Just as a way of slowing down what tends to be the stress response to start to speak a little bit quicker. So some deep breathing can really help. Margaret Thatcher used to have a speaking problem. Somebody let her know that she was too shrill. And so right before she would speak, she would have hot water and with some honey and lemon in it. And that was really helpful to bringing her voice down. Just like in the gravitas, you need to over prepare. And then when you do, less can be more. You don't need so many words to say what you're saying because you know your stuff cold. You can get right to the point. And finally, I love this one for women as well, invoking your vertical. So I'm going to tell a little story about what this means. So Ann Ernie, who headed up HR at Bloomberg, described an incident where she was under a lot of pressure from the board and from the senior leadership team. And she had to make a very unpopular decision. In the meeting room, the other executives, who were mostly male, were ganging up on her. They were actually yelling and cursing about this decision that she was making. And she had the organization. She needed to have the decision agreed to in that meeting, and she needed to leave and implement it. The organization was waiting for this to come through. So what she said in her words, I sat there and with every ounce of energy, kept pushing my feet into the floor, sitting tall, making my spine and head straight.
MaryBeth, are you still there? I think we have a slight technical issue here. Maybe try just turning your audio on and off real quick. To our attendees, sorry for the brief interruption. We'll look to resolve this quick technical issue and be back as soon as possible. Hi, everyone. I appreciate your patience. We are working to get MaryBeth back online. So if you can hang tight for a few more minutes, we'll hope to pick up where we left off in just a few minutes. Again, I appreciate your patience. Sorry about this unfortunate technical glitch, but we hope to be back shortly. Again, for all those on the call, I appreciate your patience. We are still hoping to bring MaryBeth back for the last 15 minutes of the hour here to continue with her webinar content. Yeah, trying to get the login working properly. She's having trouble getting back into the event, so we're working to resolve that. Again, please bear with us if you can still stick around for a bit, and we'll hope to be up and running again in just a few minutes.
Okay, I'm back. Adam, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, MaryBeth. Sorry about that technical issue, but yeah, I can hear you great. If you want to just stay off camera, and that way, if there is any connectivity issue, sometimes not having the video will
Yes.
help with that.
Okay, good.
But let me give you make sure you can bring your presentation deck back up.
Okay, very good. Sorry to everyone that's on the call. Unfortunately, sometimes these things happen, and let's just resume. Okay.
So you should be able to pull it back up. There we go.
Okay, there we go. So we had finished on polishing our communication skills. I think I lost you at this invoke your vertical. Adam, did you hear the whole story, or was I midstream with the story?
I think you got through most of it, but yeah, you can maybe pick up there. It would be a good spot.
Okay, very good. So the invoke your vertical is really about being grounded. It's about being fully present. It's about being confident, really being sitting up as tall as you can and really being a commanding presence, right? Especially when you're under difficulty or in the middle of a difficult situation. So let's move into appearance. Again, making sure it doesn't get in the way. It's only 5% of the importance, if you recall, but if we get it wrong, it can really make an issue. So really, we want to minimize distractions. We want simple, stylish clothing, and we want to stay appropriate to the organization and obviously to the audience. Okay, so I want to have time to make sure we get into the action planning. So what can you do if you want to improve your executive presence? I'm sure many of you joined this call for that reason. First, ask for feedback and act on it. Ask people, your peers, mentors, friends in the organization, spouses, people outside of the organization even. Practice with them if you have to give a speech. Ask people going into a meeting, if there's somebody that you're in a meeting with, let them know ahead of time. I'd like to get some feedback on this part of my presentation. Can you let me know afterwards if I hit it on the head or not? Ask for feedback and act on it. Develop a network of peers that can support you, particularly for female leaders. It's so important to have other women who can provide feedback, who can provide support, and who look out for you. Finally, cultivate mentors and sponsors 1 to 2 level up. So mentors, people that help us over our career paths, developing our careers, and sponsors, people that actually look for specific projects and specific roles to nominate us for. So really cultivate those people. If you'd like to know more about this content, all the content that we've talked about today, the book is Executive Presence by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. I did want to end with some action planning. So we have a handout which is accessible on your GoToWebinar control panel. Under the handouts, which is down there near the bottom right above the chat, there's an executive presence action plan. It's blank. And so if you'd like to download that, that's a great way for yourself to put in place a plan to take your executive presence forward. So I dropped in here some notes. These are actually based on a real person that I've been coaching. With a few of the things changed, but just as a way of working through how might you use an action plan. So she had a goal. She wanted to be more confident in her communications and a better facilitator. She's the CEO of a large foundation. She has to work a lot with a board of directors who she reports to, who tend to be men. Most of them are men, and tend to be big people in their respective industries. So they can be quite a difficult audience. So she wanted to be more confident, but a better facilitator as well. Her current strengths, it's a great way to say, what part am I working from? Or what strengths am I working from? What do I not want to change, right? She's got great command of facts and information, great integrity and decisiveness. Sometimes she can be too decisive, sometimes too many facts and details as well, right? As we say in coaching, Any strength that's overused becomes a weakness. So these are her strengths. They were also sometimes showing up as weakness. She was overusing them because she wasn't focused on enough of some of the other things, such as a more collaborative style. She tended to present lots of information and a decision rather than getting their input earlier in the stream. So we decided to develop a lot of things, but I pulled out just two. One was confidence. She pulled that out, and she said for her, she feels like she's not being taken seriously, right? She's with this room full of big name men, and she wants to know that they take her seriously. I actually observed her in a meeting, and I said, guess what? They're taking you seriously, but you're fidgeting all the time. You're nodding your head too much. You're moving around. You're constantly shifting in your chair. What's detracting from your confidence and from your ability to be authoritative in the room most to your audience is actually that you're fidgeting so much. So it's not something that she had any idea of, which is why it can be so critical to get some feedback on this. So we put in some actions. These are just a few of those. She's practicing in every engagement, every type of team meeting, individual one-on-one meeting, and board meetings, sitting really still, showing she's listening fully, not by nodding her head, but by looking the person in the eye. And she started that immediately. So if you start thinking out action steps, get really specific with what you're going to do and how are you going to do that and by when. Right? By when are you going to do that helps you put that into place more effectively. And then the last column, how do you know you're successful? She's going to keep getting feedback from me, her coach, as well as from people that are in more meetings than I am sitting in with her. I've also suggested that she might record herself so that she can see herself real time, right? So really great things for all of us to do, especially the recording yourself. The second behavior, ability to command and read the room. She felt there was a lack of persuasion and influence on her part. What I saw in the meeting, too much focus on data, not enough focused on that person's individual motivators. Maybe they need more of a story. Maybe they want to hear more of the background and the relationships of that situation, less about the data. And what's in it for me. The action steps, we selected a few, you can read them, and then obviously, how do we know if you're successful? So this is just a sample of a real life action plan as a suggestion for how you might use your action plan to take this forward. So I'm going to pause there. We're coming up just at 1:51. 12:51, I should say. I'm on the East Coast. I want to have some time for questions. So I'm going to pause there and hand it over to you, Adam, to let me know if there are any questions that we should address.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, for picking up so seamlessly, and yeah, I'm happy to relay a few of the questions that we've received. So a couple. The first, we have an audience member who is hoping you could restate that invoke your verticals anecdote a bit, since that I think was cut off a bit. If you can just come back to that example a little bit and elaborate on that point.
Yes, to tell it a little bit more succinctly. It was the head of HR from Bloomberg. She was in a difficult meeting. She had a room full of men that were actually cursing at her and yelling at her about this decision that she was trying to make. It was time sensitive. She sat up as tall as she could. She planted her feet on the ground. Back was nice and straight. When she spoke, she leaned forward. So she presented grounded, commanding, solid presence. She looked very sure of herself. That's what the invoking your vertical is. A great example of using the authoritative body language as opposed to the a more friendly style, in that case, more approachable.
Great. We've got several more questions coming in here. Another question, kind of referring back a little bit in your presentation, we had an audience member ask about the improving your appearance slide, the points that you made on there. She mentioned that she didn't get much beyond the first bullet, but anything you could add to what you shared about how you can improve your appearance and how that factors into EP?
Yes, I'm sorry, I did fly through that slide a little quickly. Again, with appearance, it's really about matching the organizational construct and then taking it up a level if you can. You don't want appearance to get in the way. So your clothing should be as simple as possible, clean and simple. Your grooming, the same, right? You want to keep hair, makeup, all of that as reflective as possible to the industry that you're in, as well as, to what's
appropriate for your level. So as 2 examples, right? I do tons of coaching in financial services, as you might imagine. I'm in New York City. Women in banking tend to keep the makeup minimal. They don't wear a lot of it. It's quite simple if they wear any. I've also coached a lot in Sephora, actually. And Sephora, the women, as you might imagine, it's, you know, a makeup company in some ways. They sell lots of makeup products. And the women there obviously get a lot more experimental and creative with their makeup, from bright eyeshadows and bright red lipsticks. So you need to know the organization that you're in. And the best thing that you can do is benchmark against somebody who is a peer or a level above you, that has a lot of reputation and standing, and that you know other people admire them for their presence. And what can you learn from how they show up? That's the simplest way I can answer that.
Great, thanks. Another great question here from one of our audience members. Grace under fire, how do you achieve that, and how do you reframe your mind to achieve this characteristic?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, grace under fire. So I think going back to that Anne Ernie situation, right, invoke your vertical, she had grace under fire. She had great presence, right? She wasn't getting flustered, so you have to know your stuff cold. All of these things, I think, work in tandem with grace under fire. So you know your stuff cold, you're showing up as confident, maybe even authoritative if the situation calls. And then as practical tips, how do you make sure that you're not getting stressed out or not getting flustered by that? The best thing you can do from a mind-body perspective is take some deep breaths, even in the moment. Nobody's going to notice. You don't have to make them obvious deep breaths. Slow your breathing a little bit. As you slow your breathing, the body gets more still. The mind starts to slow, and you actually get more clear. It's a way of clearing out the mind. A little tip from mindfulness world. So that would be some suggestions on grace under fire.
Great. Another good contextual question on any insight into doing all of these things that you've described in a remote environment where most employees use video calls because they're across the country. Any particular advice on exuding EP in a remote environment?
Yes, such a great question. So I work remotely a lot, and I'm not on camera now, and I leave it off so that we don't get the connection funky again. But if you noticed, just like we talked about appearance and grooming, keeping it simple, I try to keep the space that I work in very simple. So if you notice behind me is just kind of a cream background, right? I tend to keep my clothes simple. And I tend to make sure with virtual work, it's really important so that you're really showing up well on your screen, particularly if you have to be authoritative to that. So making sure you're front and center to your screen, like I hope I conveyed earlier, is important as well. And then because other people are vertical, people like to be on webinars and disengage and multitask. So one of the challenges is actually making sure other people are paying attention. So to the extent that you can control that virtual meeting space a little bit and ask others to put on their cameras as well, having cameras on is the best way to be conveying executive presence if you're doing it effectively, and making sure you're controlling the message in the right way and that people are actually hearing the message.
Great. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. This one, speaking to the 6 questions deep point that you made earlier in the presentation, how can you project executive presence when you can't be 6 questions deep? As a leader, I'm often confronted with situations where I need to be taken seriously, but don't have the opportunity to prepare as much as I'd like.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so a couple of things. I think first and foremost, don't be afraid in the moment to say, I don't have the answer for that right now, but let me get back to you. And I can think of a senior leader I was coaching last year. She always felt under pressure to give an answer right then and there. And I think as women, we sometimes put that pressure on ourselves, but it is perfectly appropriate to say, here's what I know right now, but I want to look into that a little bit more, or I don't have the information right now to really give you a full answer on that, so let me get back to you. So I'd say that's one thing. And if you truly have to give an answer in the moment, again, say what you can, but to the extent that you're not comfortable that that's the full information, try to give yourself some leeway to circle back to that at a later time.
Great. And another, I think, really great question from our audience. And somebody asking, you had mentioned a few times about looking to somebody, especially a female role model within the organization, maybe a level above you, who you can kind of use to benchmark how you implement some of these principles. What do you do when all of the levels above you are men when it comes to role models, mentors, and appearance?
Oh boy, what a great question too. Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because well, it's always helpful to have some female leaders to talk to. But if everybody above you is men, I'd say, first of all, are there some peers that are female? So definitely pull your peer network in if there are some women that you trust at the same level, or even below you. People below you can certainly give good feedback and be good people to share and develop with. But if everybody above you is men, I'd say pick out a few selectively that you really trust and respect and ask them to be your mentors. There's still going to be great reflections of what the culture and what the organization expects of you. They just won't be female. So men can certainly be great mentors and sponsors to women. But it's great if you do have some women as well.
Great. I know I said 2 questions. Do we have time for one more, MaryBeth?
Absolutely.
I saw another great one that came in.
Yes.
Could you speak of EP specifically when leading junior employees? Are there any specific aspects to focus on? In this person's experience, young people seem averse to being led in an authoritative way.
Oh, yes. Wow. Millennials and the workforce today. So definitely the audience is part of what you need to think about with your EP. So with senior leaders, how you show up is going to be a little bit different than the people below you. And to that point, it can be helpful to be more collaborative at times, to be more coaching. But at the same time, I don't want you to give your authority away. If there are issues, if there are problems, if it's about delegation and accountability, there are times when you need to be authoritative. But I guess I would go back to the research from Professor Grunfeld at Stanford that talks about know when you need to be approachable and know when you need to be authoritative. But certainly for more recent and more junior members of the workforce, they need to see that approachability to have the same amount of trust of you. So you might want to start with the approachability and then build up to the authoritativeness as needed. Great question.
Great. Well, thank you so much, MaryBeth, for all of this time in Q&A and for your presentation and for sharing all these tips for understanding and leveraging executive presence for career success. I hope that everyone joining us for today's call will continue to join us for more programming this month, including next week on Thursday, March 14th at 12 p.m. when alumna Anne-Marie Siegel joins us for a webinar on LinkedIn for job searching, networking, and career building. And that event will be a good primer for our UChicago Connect Alumni LinkedIn review on Monday, March 25th at 12 p.m. Central Time, which will provide an opportunity for alumni to receive free, focused feedback on their LinkedIn profiles and how to optimize their presence on that platform. Please visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for the most up-to-date schedule of events. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for joining, everybody.